that through. We'll still accept people as they're coming through to get onto our main speakers. So good morning, everybody. I believe, Sue, you started recording, so the session will be recorded. We can send that to you following the event. Thanks very much for joining us on this Constructing Excellence Wales event on 2 Welsh procurement policy notices. We're looking at sourcing building materials for construction projects in Wales and decarbonising through procurement, which is taking account of carbon reduction plans. We go to the next. I'm Kat Griffith-Williams. I'm the CEO of Constructing Excellence in Wales. So a little bit of housekeeping. If we can just remain on mute during when the speakers are presenting, that would be fantastic. Please do use the chat function. If time allows, we'll field a Q&A at the end. So do pose your questions to the speakers if you do have any, and also raise a hand and I can try and draw you in if you wish to verbalise your comments and questions then. To give you a very quick overview of Constructing Excellence in Wales, we're the united voice of the Welsh construction sector. We represent every aspect and part of the supply chain. We were originally funded by Welsh Government, but now we're a self-funded body. So our members are therefore hugely important to us as they enable us to continue to championing the sector's role in underpinning Welsh Government strategies and creating a built environment fit for the future. Go to the next slide, Sue. Our core drivers of our work are based on 3 principles predominantly, which is collaboration, best practice and whole life value. And we advocate to drive change from short-term cost towards long-term value. And we also align our work with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So I really encourage you to connect with us and support the movement by becoming a Constructing Excellence Wales member. And all our contact details are held here. So please do link up with us. Today's sessions, we're going to hear from Rob Newman, who's the Welsh Government's commercial policy lead. Rob is going to give us an overview of the WPPNs I've mentioned. We've got Rico Volter-Levich, I hope I've done that justice, Rico, who is the head of housing and planning policy for the National Federation of Builders, who's going to give us a bit of a reality from the experience of members and the intelligence that they're generating. We're going to hear from Richard Jones, the regional manager of the Builders Merchants Federation, who's going to talk us through a little bit about future projections, and Alex Reid, who's the director of Reconstruction Holdings Limited, who's going to look at a little bit about the impact on local business and the practical implications of what we're looking at today. Like I said, there will be a chance at the end following the presentations to have a Q&A depending on time. So please do interact with us in the chat function and I'll draw you in at the end of the presentations. So without further ado, let's go over to Rob Newman, who will take us through the presentation and give us an overview of the WPPN. So over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Gav. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Newman. I'm the Commercial Policy Lead within Welsh Government. Commercial policy is part of the Commercial Procurement Directorate, which is a cross-cutting Welsh Government Directorate accountable to the Minister of Finance, for Finance and Local Government. The Directorate has a central role and oversees development of the Welsh Government's policy for public sector procurement in Wales, providing leadership to the procurement profession, as well as having oversight of the Welsh Government's procurement policies and objectives. Commercial policy influences how we spend and how it's managed, and the means of driving wider Welsh Government policy outcomes, emphasising fair work, quality local jobs, decarbonisation, and other environmental benefits. So commercial policy, we're externally focused in the main. So we work with the procurement profession across the Welsh public sector and are responsible for developing Welsh Government procurement tools and guidance for use for the Welsh public sector, driving improvement, ensuring maximum value that is achieved from the £7 billion annual Welsh public sector spend. So we promote best practice procurement and innovation to foster a culture that maximises social, economic, environmental and cultural outcomes from public procurement. It's important at this point, I suppose, to highlight that we don't generally develop policy. What we do is we kind of support the development of procurement commitments that are within other wider policy areas. So you'll see that within the Net Zero Wales report, where there is a procurement commitment within the wider decarb agenda. As mentioned above, one of our main roles is to provide guidance and support to procurement professions across the Welsh public sector. One of the methods for doing this is through the development of Wales procurement policy notes, which is what we're here to talk about today. So if we go to the next slide. So as I mentioned previously, with WPPN, so I'll call them WPPNs from now on because it's a bit of a tongue twister, are developed to provide guidance on best practice to public sector procurement. The guidance itself is, and the information set out in these documents, is neither legal advice nor statutory guidance, and is not intended to be exhaustive. So WPPNs are not mandated, as we don't have the power to mandate. However, they do provide and offer practical advice and support to the procurement profession, so they can start building in procurement ambition into kind of tender process. The WPPNs, they build on and consistent with the Welsh procurement policy statement that we released this year and the procurement regulations. So the Welsh procurement policy statement sets out the strategic direction for public sector procurement in Wales, which highlights the vision of Welsh public sector procurement being a powerful lever with the ability to affect sustained change to achieve social, economic, environment and cultural outcomes for the well-being of Wales. On the .gov website, there's a library of existing WPPNs that you might find interesting. You'll note in some instances that we haven't developed our own WPPNs. We've actually adopted UK government PPNs, whilst linking this back to a Welsh policy context. Whilst these WPPNs are developed for buyers, it'll give suppliers and contractors an understanding of the kind of policy drives that sit behind some of the tenders. So it'll give you an opportunity to understand why some of the questions or how some of the specifications are written in the way they are, and also mean that you can kind of proactively prepare yourselves for tenders coming up. Next slide. So in today's session, we'll cover two recent WPPNs that we've published. So that'll be WPPN 0921, sourcing building materials for construction projects in Wales, and WPPN 0621, decarbonisation through procurement, taking account of carbon reduction. On to the next slide. So on this one, so WPPN 0921, sourcing building materials for construction projects in Wales. It was published back in October, and it's developed it following engagement with external stakeholders. So that was issued via the construction forum. We had quite a lot of feedback come in terms of the note that we're producing. And this WPPN was developed by the delivery team, sit alongside my team in the Commercial Procurement Directorate. So the WPPN provides advice to the public sector bodies in Wales on how to manage market pressures affecting the availability and affordability of building materials, and was published in response to the unprecedented pricing pressures across building materials. The key message from the WPPN is that contracting authorities and contractors should work together in a spirit of mutual trust and cooperation to identify suitable alternative materials or agree acceptable changes to the completion date or even KPIs. The WPPN itself provides a number of practical approaches that can be considered and implemented in addressing the issues for buying organisations and suppliers alike. So it's covered three main areas that it covers, or three practical steps it covers, are managing delays due to material supply issues, managing the impact of volatile material prices, and also the approaches that can be taken that will impact future construction works and maintenance contracts. As mentioned above, this WPPN was developed in collaboration with stakeholders. It was led by the commercial delivery team. In each of the WPPNs, there's a contact email address in there, so if there's any further questions on content, you can drive them through there. And it's the same with all the WPPNs. But if we go on to the next slide. So moving on, it's the WPPN 0621 decarbonisation through procurement, taking account of carbon reduction plans. So decarbonisation obviously is quite high up in the agenda for everyone at the moment. Further enhanced by COP26 that was held last month, and the recently published Net Zero Wales Carbon Budget 2, which was published as well last month prior to the COP26, which follows on from the Prosperity for All at Low Carbon Wales, includes the following commitments in relation to procurement. So policy 79 states carbon reduction plans are a mandatory part of tenders, become a mandatory part of tenders for Welsh Government procurement contracts for over £5 million from April 2022, and prioritise products which are fully recyclable, multi-use, or able to repurpose as part of a more circular approach to waste. So, in answer to that, we released WPPN 0621. What we did with that one, we actually adopted UK government's procurement policy note, which coincidentally has the same number, 0621. But what we mandate, so we're mandating Welsh Government contracts at £5 million or more as a total value from the 1st of April, and recommended as good practice to the rest of the Welsh produce sector. So whilst, like I said at the beginning, we don't have the power to mandate, what we can do is we can recommend best practice. So this WPPN provides further information specifically to Welsh public sector contracting authorities to help them meet the 2030 target for a net zero public sector in Wales, and also increase awareness of amendments made to the Environmental Act 2016. The WPPN itself suggests introducing new selection criteria as part of this, assessing suppliers' technical and professional ability. So that allows contracting authorities the ability to assure a bidder's commitment, contributing to a net zero public sector in Wales by 2030. The key issue to be addressed is whether a bidder has taken steps to understand the environmental impact and carbon footprint relevant to the delivery of the contract. So UK government's PPN that we've adopted is accompanied by some quite good guidance scoring methodologies and supplier guidance, as well as a frequently asked question FAQ document. So we've also been engaging with Business Wales in terms of providing support in this area for Welsh, from a Welsh perspective. So the UK government, as I mentioned, the UK government PPN has got quite a lot of guidance that's linked to it. And again, all this is linked within our WPPN. So within the Welsh Government PPN, whilst we adopt it, we also put signposts back to the guidance provided by UK government. As mentioned previously, these are only two of the WPPNs, of a library of WPPNs, and I recommend that you'd go on to the .gov, and I'll share the link to the website after this meeting, but go onto that website and have a look at all the other WPPNs that are on there, because what you'll see from them is where, again, as I've already said, really, you'll see where the focuses are in terms of delivering policy. And it is understood there's a lot of policy out there that people need to, well, procurement professionals in particular need to start putting into tenders, but it's understanding when and where to put them in, and where it's best, where focusing on key ones rather than trying to expand a wide range of them. So yeah, so when you get a chance, have a look on the website and just familiarise yourself with those WPPNs, because then it will just enhance your understanding and it will help when you're responding to tenders as well. I think that's it for me really today.
Many thanks, Rob. We're going to go over to Rico from the National Federation of Builders now. I'll park a question until that we've heard from all of our presenters. So let's go over to Rico.
Lovely, thank you very much. So move on to the first slide, the next slide, I guess. So I wanted just to talk about our industry worries really and realities, and it's not really a criticism because I think that the work that has been done has been very strong. But when you represent SMEs, you realise there's a very broad spectrum of needs that sometimes get left behind. So I thought I'd just talk through the initial industry worries we've seen over the last, say, decade on a number of projects that perhaps look at the government delivering change, delivering maybe one word, forcing might be another. But I don't think you'll find that many construction companies are that worried about change. It's just how it's enabled. So in the last decade especially, SMEs have really struggled to grow their businesses. And in part that's due to a stifled pipeline of work, often coming from procurement, but also an uncertain planning process. And that unfortunately puts greater pressure on the majority of them to upskill their workforces. And that's an issue for decarbonisation because it means that actually there are few people within a business that can concentrate on these sort of real required needs. But we've also seen a most economic tender, where we might have a situation whereby that advantageous tender is about the actual site itself rather than how you decarbonise the industry. And that wider construction industry, I think, for Wales is especially important. Some of our members are the predominant rural employers in an area. And so unless you enable them, it's actually quite complex to get more Welsh companies involved. And I think occasionally this comes down to targets. So I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But I do worry and I think businesses often worry that we are hitting targets to appeal to voters and not ensuring the industry is facilitated to really change their approaches. And that doesn't grow decarbonisation opportunities. In a way, it stifles it. And I think that if you're talking about a broader industry, it's absolutely vital to understand how you enable a wider group of companies to be part of it. And in the long run, that unfortunately loses companies' attention for tenders. And they struggle with knowing why they might not have made a tender list or win a contract, and they struggle with absorbing the risk to do so. And therefore, they just end up shying away from them. And I think we see that fairly regularly. The government has made great strides to try and change the approach of who they target work at, but we still see the same companies winning the work, and they're unfortunately a lot of the bigger companies. And I think the building information modelling is a good example of how we should learn from previous mistakes, because if you look at it effectively, very few companies do it unless it's government related work, and that's because the government is the client and the largest companies win this work, and it's a very few number of companies. Smaller companies do too, but they're the only ones that can really compete for it. And that is, I think, the major concern about decarbonisation, that it's done to industry. So if I just talk about on the next slide, just try kind of understanding decarbonisation. So if I think about materials themselves, it really a strategy to sequester carbon and reduce waste is absolutely vital. But we're looking at MMC at the moment, modern methods of construction. But actually what we're seeing with government is, despite there being a definition, we are focusing quite heavily on off-site and modular approaches for the very largest schemes, rather than appreciating that actually there are 7 definitions for modern methods of construction. And industry fought very hard to ensure that we didn't just have a 2-tier approach, but there are other approaches to ensure that the whole of industry can understand why you would want to be part of MMC. And actually decarbonisation will be a really big part of the MMC strategy. If I look at something like the strategy itself, Part L, which I'm sure many people know, is energy efficiency within buildings. We focused on uplifting that by 19% for local authorities. Now, I would again stress that perhaps this is a voter's strategy rather than an outcome strategy. So something that we put forward is, could a procurement process or could a planning process have a passive house, local, or passive home, local development order? Because that would encourage more of the industry to actually deliver better outcomes. Unfortunately, we didn't think of it as that strategy, and we're in this situation now where actually the knowledge within the sector to deliver a passive type home isn't great, and some of those principles are very easily adoptable. And instead, some of those principles were adopted in housing without understanding how they interact with each other to reach that Part L uplift, and we got overheating and poor air quality. And regulation is such an important part of that. So very recently we had the Green Homes Grant, and it's been certified by Trustmark using PAS 2030, PAS 2035. But actually there was another regulation called ENERFIT that was left out. And actually they are some of the most skilled workers and understanding how to retrofit homes. So they would have been a perfect component of the Green Homes Grant. But in order to tick a box and deliver an outcome, we didn't perhaps understand how important that regulation element was in enabling change. And I think that in materials, that's going to be a key component. And of course, when we talk about what are we actually trying to decarbonise, well, placemaking is an important part of that. There is a worry that we are simply looking at site-based approaches for tick boxes, the use of timber, just to say, yep, we've ticked this box, or the provision of a cycle lane that doesn't have regional connectivity, or electric plant machinery, which is charged by diesel generators, or just solar panels on roofs that don't actually connect back into the grid or don't connect into anything and are just simply there to, I use the word virtue signal, but I think obviously it's not a cohesive approach, and how we actually ensure that we support a transition to delivering change across the whole of industry is so important. So little things that the NFB have done is we've tried to have some sort of understanding of what energy production is renewable, or whether you can get work out your carbon footprint with a simple calculation, just so members understand that there is this option available to them, but not requiring it, because we think that's the best way to ensure that people understand the process, so that when eventually it does become required, they understand it. It's really about ensuring that the wider industry can be part of that. So in my next slide, I'm just going to talk about a specific example. So advancing a strategy of decarbonising materials. So I've chosen this one because I think there was lots of decarbonisation approaches. And if we look at something that's going on at the moment, especially within embodied carbon, Part Z is being introduced, and that's to really assess and reduce the amount of embodied carbon on a site. Now, if you look at all the people behind that, there are no SMEs, it's simply large companies. And once again, that's going to create division within the sector and a knowledge division. And that's something that's absolutely vital to tackle. So if you look at the worldwide demand of timber, it's increasing considerably, and it's going to have to, especially as people want to decarbonise projects, and cross-laminated timber is a great solution, so it's gaining greater traction. But if prices have gone up by 200%, and they are dropping a little bit now, but I don't think they'll go back to the way that the prices they were, how can you deliver a better decarbonised approach? It may require some local authorities, some councils, some governments being a bit brave and procurers and saying, well, actually, do you know what? There's a low carbon masonry product here, bricks, blocks. This concrete is actually delivered in a slightly different way. So perhaps it's reused as a precast concrete, or it's recycled as a concrete block, or made in a more recycled, using recycled energy, and recycling metals as well. So will they be removed from the process and narrowing the pool, therefore increasing the risk that companies will have to take in order to be part of a procurement process? How can we indicate to members, to Welsh and even British manufacturers, how to deliver the lowest carbon footprint? Which are the materials as part of the Welsh, government strategy? Do we need to grow our CLT base? We do. Can we reuse that concrete with precast? These are the type of things I think we need to consider. And is there a lower carbon produced glass and tile solution? We're seeing hydrogen being involved now. Is that part of an industrial strategy? And I think that's what a government can do. It can enable these different types of routes to market. And I think the WPPN does a really good job, sourcing the building materials for construction projects in Wales. That focuses that conversation. And it also ensures that we can have a more skilled workforce that can be part of the process, because we then know what it is we are actually aiming for. And if we look at construction itself, I think that's a major concern for many members that we represent, and I think the broader industry as well, because we do speak to them as much as possible. So 7 in 10 construction apprentices are trained by SMEs, and they're the predominant rural employers. how important is that lower mileage and careers, not just jobs for the period of the project. We need to actually build that decarbonisation knowledge in order to build the material decarbonisation. And that requires us to think whether it's just a Welsh approach. So, for example, 74% of materials in house building are sourced in the UK. Is the intention to grow that percentage? So, a Welsh company we work with is Benfield Timber Buildings. They're actually we've encouraged them to be a CLC net zero business champion. So that will really help smaller builders really kind of understand that they can be part of the process. I think we saw from the modernise or die approach from Mark Farmers that actually perhaps we're looking very broadly at how we make sure the whole industry shifts, but actually only focusing on the very largest companies. And there was just a very small line to say we can have local strategies, where you can learn a little bit about offsite and modular. Well, that will only bring a certain number of companies on, and actually we need to ensure that we get a better approach. So that availability element is absolutely important. Is there something in the access where we can have a decarbonised product list? I think that would really, really help to not just ensure that the buildings can be delivered in a different way and there's better knowledge, but that the insurers and the mortgage companies can actually back these schemes and understand that there is a transition period and there is a route map to decarbonising within materials, and it's safe. And I think that's what procurement process from government can do, is they can give that assurance. And I think that we see a little bit within Homes England, say, for example, they haven't adopted perhaps a strong enough approach to deliver that. And Wales is, I think, moving in the right direction to understand that they can actually deliver a bit more of that broader thinking. I mentioned MMC earlier. Well, sticking to those definitions is absolutely important. It's absolutely vital. We can't just advance offsite. We have to advance the material strategy. And I think that eventually it will just end up, if we're not careful, of being a costly bureaucratic process that suits PLCs and not SMEs. And I think the Wales is one of the places where we can really see the benefits of smaller companies. When we do travel to Wales, and I'm often in Cardiff, I feel really proud to see our members' signs and hoardings up everywhere, because they are local employers and they've struggled in the last decade. So how do we ensure that they don't struggle so they can take on more people? And that job pipeline is absolutely vital. And I think that finally, I'd say that we need to kind of accept innovative solutions. So will we be delivering fixtures and fittings as part of the material solution, or is it just the fabric of the building? I've just seen someone that, like they say, arguably the private sector is ahead. Well, I would agree they are. And I think that, our example earlier of Benfield Timber, they're a smaller organisation. They're a Cero as well. They're a small organisation that are growing quite a lot. There are things like GB Sol, who are another Welsh company. There's lots of this innovation that perhaps we don't work together in an innovative approach. And as another just final example on that, I saw Birmingham today have installed or given rise to a lithium-ion plant of 50 megawatts to store renewable energy. Well, that's all fine and well, but it's lithium-ion, and we have a different solution in Ambry that can do as good a job, a smaller unit, and it's completely recyclable technology. But are we having these conversations to ensure that there is flexibility in the procurement process, to ensure that we can allow these materials and these solutions to come forward? I think that's the real key element. So slide 4, because I feel like I've been a little bit doom and gloom. We should see criticism and innovation as an opportunity to advance change, not an opposition to it. And I think this is a real key component for me. So I regularly talk to the heat pump engineers, and it's not that I want to challenge them and say, look, this doesn't work in this. I want to understand how we can make sure that we have a strategy so that all of industry can deliver change. And I think that is absolutely key to the materials challenge, because we can get bogged down with this being the right solution. But unless we enable Welsh and British manufacturers to deliver the better outcomes and deliver lower carbon products, I think that actually there's always going to be a conversation to be had. So my advice to this is we are in it together. And at this stage, let's not rush into a final solution. Let's work together to deliver a better outcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Rico. That's hugely helpful, just giving a context of WPPNs and looking at SMEs and our micros throughout Wales. So might draw you in following the presentations. But if we go over now to the Builders Merchants Federation and hear from Richard Jones, that would be great.
Thank you, Kat. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Richard Jones, Regional Manager for the BMF in South Wales. My colleague, David Harding's also on the call. David is our policy advisor with Welsh Government in Wales. So just, could we go to the next slide, please? Just to say, we've got some well-known members that you'll recognise. We've got about 50 members, 40 independent and national, and some suppliers. And we represent their interests. We're the only association representing builders merchants, timber, roofing, plumbing and heating merchants in the UK and Ireland, protecting their interests and provide a lot of training, that kind of thing. So next slide, please. So I thought I'd just give you an indication of material price increases that have occurred through 2021. Obviously, rising energy costs are a concern at the moment, but as you'll see, bag cement has been affected. There are further increases to come in 2022. I'll take you through those in a minute, but you can see that it's been quite volatile in terms of price, especially on timber and key products. So next slide, please. Materials on allocation as well, because obviously getting hold of materials has been a problem for merchants and then supplying the trade. Steel lintels are expected to be on the allocation for the short term, I believe. Glass wall insulation, concrete fence posts, concrete products in general could continue to be a problem in terms of price and availability. Plasterboard expected to come off allocation in January. Again, price increases will apply going into 2022. Bag cement now off allocation, but again could be back on in Q2 with a further price increase to come. Again, all these attributable to rise in energy costs. Just to note there, bulk and bag cement, I believe there's going to be a 5-year shortfall, or could be, even with the cement producers being at full capacity. Won't meet the demand, you know, with the major projects going on, projects I should say, HS2, Hinkley, infrastructure projects and so on. So that could be a concern. Next slide, please. Again, materials still on allocation. Some will be affected by container shipping container surcharges until Q2. PIR board, I believe, is still difficult to get hold of. Aircrete blocks, supply issues to continue, as with bricks going into 2022. Roof lights again are on allocation for the short term, with a number of manufacturers and suppliers there. So natural stone and ironmongery, imported products, we're expecting shipping container surcharges to stay in place until at least Q2. Next slide, please. Yeah, so during COVID, the Construction Leadership Council was formed, and part of that is the Product Availability Group, which our Chief Exec John Newcomb and Peter Capehorn, CEO of the CPA, co-chair. So I based the following information. There's a few slides, but I'll skip through just to bring people up to date. They put out a monthly statement which has been useful, and the BMF have been very active with the Product Availability Group stroke CLC during COVID, advising Welsh Government on material shortages, etc., and also encouraging and giving guidance on our members to stay open and support local authorities in the NHS during the pandemic. So next slide, please. So levels demand is quite wordy, but just to skip through, extremely high levels of demand. I think it's been a global problem, not just the UK. Demand continues to outstrip supply for certain products, as I say, particularly those being imported. The current picture is more positive than in recent months. I mean, builders merchants are still extremely busy. They expect that to continue. Improved availability of products across most regions. Some of that is due to a slowdown, especially in retail sales, which is obviously seasonal as well. But high demand, obviously, through pandemic with patios and home improvements and fencing and all that kind of thing taking place while people were on furlough. Supply of bricks, blocks, and roofing products, timber battens have overtaken concrete roof tiles. Concrete roof tiles and clay roof tiles still a problem, and that is expected to continue. It was described as a bit of a mess to me the other day, so we'll see where that goes. Next slide, please. RMI sector, residential repair, maintenance, improvement. It remains pretty active. I think most of our members are expecting a good year again next year to be busy, a similar year to the year that's gone. So they're expecting to be busy throughout next year. So that's again brings its own problems with materials being available. Softening has helped improve some stocks, such as cement. As I say, that has eased in recent weeks, but again could go back on allocation in the new year. Next slide, please. Infrastructure, commercial and house building. Brick supply is a longer term issue. There are investment. We'll show a slide in a minute that shows Forterra. So investment is going into brick production, which will help things. But again, it's going to be a longer term problem there. So we just need to keep an eye on that. I think there's communication is the key, forward ordering, visibility, and communicating between suppliers and manufacturers and merchants. Hopefully, keep an eye on things and go forward steadily. Next slide, please. Here we are, Forterra say investing in a new plant in Desford. It's a £95 million investment. So I believe that comes on stream sometime next year. So that's a demonstration of investment that's being made, which hopefully will help to alleviate the situation going forward. Next slide, please. Again, infrastructure, commercial and new house building. High demand over the past 18 months has made life difficult for block manufacturers to build the level of stocks required to maintain regular supply throughout the year. I think that's going to continue into the new year, especially in terms of aircrete blocks. Nonetheless, demand from the house building expected to put supply of blocks in general under pressure in early 22 because market's still staying busy. Next slide, please. Yeah, just on the electrotechnical sector, just a few things to say there, but I think that from my point of view, it seems to be there's obviously been a problem with supply of microchips, especially in terms of cars and white goods and all that sort of thing. So again, product pricing continues to be a challenge, particularly for the medium-sized contractors working on the tight fixed price contracts, which are affected by those problems, supply problems. Next slide, please. Yeah, transport and imports, of course, one of the problems has been the situation with HGV drivers. Builders merchants have lost drivers to competitors, shooting off for more money. I did hear that the initiatives that have gone in place with DVSA and DVLA that have speeded things up. The situation seems to have eased, but it is a long-term problem that we've been aware of quite some time, and I see that carrying on, and it remains to be seen. Hopefully, more and more people will be attracted into the sector, especially if we can put them through the system quicker. But logistics and deliveries has been a problem, it's fair to say. Next slide, please. Similar remains. The prices are easing, which is good news for our members, although it's still volatile. And I believe flooring chipboard in particular has been a problem to especially the 18 mil, but it does seem to be an improving picture, which is better news. Although it could be still a bit bumpy going into the early part of next year. Next slide, please. Areas of concern, uncertainty around inflation, further price increases on products, particularly steel, cement, bricks, blocks, glass and ceramic tiles, again all impacted by rising energy costs. So again, we need to be aware of that. A little bit of uncertainty again with the COVID situation, with the latest variant, whether that will affect product availability and indeed affect our members well, they will remain open, but they'll probably have to bring in COVID restrictions again to keep everyone safe. Full border controls came into force, further unknown, as the implementation of UK CA mark and UK registration, etc., etc. So a few things to be aware of. Next slide, please. Response. Well, the CLC, I think it's fair to say, have done a very good job, and they will continue to do so. The BMF will, as I say, with John Newcombe acting on our behalf with the product availability group, they will be keeping an eye on things. And I say they're a monthly statement which is available on the CLC website towards the end of each month. So lines of communication remain open, and they will encourage all sectors to continue to work closely and collaborate. And I think that's the main message, really, that all parts of the sector need to communicate and collaborate to manage future challenges and plan future projects and work. And I think that's about me. Thank you, Kat.
Many thanks, Richard. That's fantastic. It gives to.
Sorry,
okay. To go through
just a couple. Yeah, inflation there, a couple of things, but these slides will be made available to you. But as I say, our members are forecasting a good year next year. They're going to remain busy. So it's been an interesting 18 months and will continue to be so. And but I say these slides will be available. If you need any more information, please let me know.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, we will circulate the slides if everybody's in agreement, so you can get all those stats following the presentations and this session. I think that's a great indication of giving us it really gives us a good understanding of product and material projections and how potentially that will impact on the sector. But let's hear from that sectoral perspective by hearing from Alex. So let's go over to Alex Reed from Reed Construction to hear from your viewpoint there, Alex.
Okay, thanks very much, Kat. So for probably most of you who don't know Reed, we're a North Wales-based SME principal contractor, primarily delivering to the public sector. So I'm not here as a procurement nor a sustainability expert, but I'm here as a business leader who's trying to do the right thing, both within our own business in terms of reducing our impacts, but also both directly and indirectly reducing our impacts, but also supporting our clients to achieve their targets, including the requirements now for carbon reduction planning, as are set out in the procurement policy notes discussed before. So for my segment today, I'm going to reflect on some of the issues and challenges around the carbon agenda, but also try and focus in on the positives and the opportunities as we see them. Go off the next slide, please, Sue. So before I get started with the complexities and challenges and the problems that we face in working towards the ambitious targets, it's just worth reflecting on where we are. So we fully accept and embrace the enormity of the challenge ahead, and we don't want to undermine the urgency for 1 second, but we need to reflect on where we actually are right now as an industry and recognise that the drive for a sustainable built environment isn't in itself a new concept to the industry. There's businesses today here in the webinar, including ourselves, that have been on the sustainable development, low carbon, collaborative journey for decades. And as I was preparing my notes for today, I looked back at BREEAM and realised that BREEAM was actually launched in 1990 as a framework for sustainable project design and delivery. So if we actually reflect on the past 30 years of progress and improvement under that framework, we've not actually come that far. And if we project that forward for what we've got to achieve now in the next 10 years, there's actually something of a daunting task at hand. But with that said, in terms of the processes and procedures within the industry, we're definitely not starting from scratch. Many of the underlying design principles that are promoted in sustainable construction and in BREEAM are based on passive methods and in-use efficiency. So the foundations are already laid for a net zero journey. Next slide, please. So how do we then move forward? The requirement for net zero is already appearing in public sector procurements. Reed currently have 2 invitation to tenders within our business with a requirement for net zero in operation. And that's a great thing, and it shows the commitment of those clients to the low carbon agenda, but it is very much only the first step in the journey. The immediate requirement for net zero in operation is showing that the client have a drive to reduce their scope 1 and 2 emissions, those directly within their control. And this is the same way that we have approached emission reduction in our business, making the quick wins and driving immediate improvements. But in reality, it's the scope 3 emissions that account for something like 80% of the built environment carbon, encompassing things like supply chain carbon, embodied carbon and end of life. So it's in that scope 3 that lies the greatest opportunity for improvement. And because it sits outside of our direct control, it's the greatest challenge in the journey to net zero. But even if we look into the scope 3 emission areas, they're starting to be addressed. The supply chain have been facing the same challenges as ourselves in providing more sustainable solutions. And we're seeing, as was mentioned before, some great innovations in terms of both materials and business practices within the supply chain. And I think it's here that the first key message lies in ensuring that the urgency of change is not diluted within the supply chain and nurturing and rewarding innovative behaviour. By breaking down the emission reduction burden between all the supply partners within a project, each plays their own individual part in the overall contribution. And how best to achieve that, as has been said before and as is in the procurement notes, it's to collaborate and integrate early. Next slide, please. So the next key message for us is that of validation. We're already delivering EPC A+ rated projects, demonstrating in-use net zero carbon. The teams on these projects are deservedly proud of such accomplishments, but the actual completion EPC is based on theoretical data. It does not account for deterioration in operational performance due to poor servicing and maintenance, inaccurate operation, or different usage of the facility. And this is of equal importance in ensuring the user's operation of the facility is as intended, as well as ensuring that the M&E systems perform as designed. With our increasing reliance, for example, on PVs for the on-site energy generation, there's got to be a robust maintenance procedure behind that, and it's got to be delivered in order for the operational effectiveness to actually be true. So if we genuinely want the facility to operate at net zero, that process of validation is essential, not just in tweaking the operational processes, but in learning lessons and incorporating them into future delivery. And if we truly care in ensuring that facility is and continues to be operationally net zero, we've got to be structured and robust in post-occupancy evaluation and compare the real world usage against the design intent. And we've got to scrutinise any discrepancy and learn from it. Again, as before, post-occupancy evaluation isn't a new concept to the industry, but it's not delivered robustly nor thoroughly. And that same issue of design versus reality is one we're facing in other aspects of our business. We're transitioning to an all-electric fleet, and we're struggling with the assessment of EVs based on their range. It's an important consideration across North Wales. The infrastructure to support in-journey charging, it's not yet mature or widespread. So the issue of range and certainty of actual miles that we can cover between charges is a real concern to our business. So assuming that the sustainable generation of energy to fuel the car in the first place, and that the embodied carbon doesn't negate any emission saving, switching to EVs is a quick win for our direct business emissions. So it's one we're moving forward with. But we are doing so in the knowledge that the design range isn't what we're actually going to get out of those vehicles. There was a recent study by Whatcar that reviewed 10 of the award-winning EVs, and they did a range versus reality test. They conducted that test in near perfect weather conditions on perfect test track roads, and not a single vehicle achieved the WLTP range. And that tells us that there is a disconnect between design and reality. And how will that change with age? We don't know. As the vehicles get older, batteries deteriorate in efficiency. They're subject to different operational parameters, including drivers, road conditions, and weather. We can expect to see even more variance. Well, the same goes for our built assets. The only way to improve is to review in use and adjust accordingly. Next slide, please. So the third theme I want to reflect on is the problem of impact or burden shifting, and this was touched on earlier. Often we hear that buying local is the solution to all the carbon issues, and certainly supporting local economy is a big consideration in our business and a big driver for Welsh Government through the Future Generations Wales Act. But localism is just one component to a sustainable procurement decision. Similarly, the consideration of from the factory gate or from the source of raw material extraction needs to be factored into the carbon consideration. These are all themes that are addressed under the Scope 3 emission measuring within the carbon reduction planning process. The last bullet on that slide, I'm not going to go into it, was just for reflection really. It's about considering alternatives. So what do you have for breakfast? Do you have cereals with milk on it, and where do you get your milk from? There's so many variables to consider in the evaluation process. What do you do to reduce your waste and environmental impacts rather from the milk? So I switch to a milk round with a glass bottle that's reusable. Okay, great, pat on the back. Or do I buy a cow and keep it in the back garden? So there's no travel miles associated with it. You know, there's so many variables. It's about bringing those all into the mix in order to make an informed decision. Next slide, please. So one of the greatest challenges we face is the balancing of deliverables, actually. We've still got the 2025 aspirations for cheaper and faster projects. They're still prevalent. At delivery level, we're faced with the issue of delivering the net zero agenda alongside all of those other client deliverables around digital asset information, project bank accounts, BREEAM, social value, budget, programme, quality, and all the rest that go with it. The single biggest opportunity to enhance project delivery in all of these areas is, as we said before, early and collaborative decision making, not compromising on the net zero criteria, but balancing other targets in consideration of best value. So again, touched on before, where there's a specialism that only exists outside of the local boundary, the social value targets around local delivery need to reflect such availability and be agreed collaboratively to recognise that the efforts of engaging the local supply chain with the project in order for them to learn and upskill where they don't have that skill set already. Next slide, please. And finally, I just want to touch quickly on whole life carbon. All of the themes that I've discussed today feed into this as an overarching consideration, but it requires real effort to drill into a project and map the carbon impact over the entire life cycle, cradle to grave. Net zero in operation is great, but it is just a stepping stone to where we should be looking, which is net zero whole life. My slide is gone, but in summary, net zero in operation, it's achievable, it's here now, it's being delivered now. Net zero whole life, which encompasses scope 1, 2 and 3, is a big challenge, but it's supported through carbon reduction plans and the supply chain integration. And the route to success as we see it is early engagement, collaborative working, designing for operational requirements, validating in use, embedding lessons, and exercising due diligence to ensure that the emissions and the impact are not shifted but removed. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex. That is a fantastic insight, really, on everything to be considered from a sectoral perspective, and really appreciate you running us through that. We've had quite a lot of comments on the side. One of the things that I just wanted to pick up on is, you know, we've looked at the WPPNs, we've looked at the impact projections and understanding and issues from the sector. One of the key kind of questions is, I suppose, if we've got anyone on the session that is able to look at how Welsh Government, particularly as a client, I don't know, Rob, if you can deal with this or if there's other colleagues on the call, but how are we going to see the WPPNs are embraced by the client? You know, I think we've all agreed that it's a great step forward, but there's a little bit of work to do with engagement and encouragement, I suppose, of incorporating them within a client's perspective. So have you got anything you can add on that?
I think from my perspective, I think whereas I'm the procurement side of things, the kind of your infrastructure projects and everything are covered by a different area, but that's what one of the reasons why we do the WPPNs is so that we can kind of push back on, keep the focus on these kind of these approaches. We do work with Commercial Procurement Service. They're part of the Commercial Directorate, which they embrace all the WPPNs that we put out there. And I think the issue, like Welsh Government's is a bit of easier, well, say easier, it's a lot easier for us to speak to people within Welsh Government because we can mandate on things and we can speak quite closely. It's the wider public sector that we don't have that kind of mandation behind. So whilst we can give it as good practice, we can't generally kind of mandate it out there. And I suppose one of the reasons, which I think this event would be pretty good, is with that awareness of the WPPNs, it gives the suppliers that can kind of push back in terms of saying, well, actually, these are some of the areas that are quite key that you should be considering. And early engagement, I totally agree, is essential for delivering any kind of innovative procurement. And that's something that's always been pushed right from when I started procurement. The earlier you have the engagement, start developing the specifications, start engaging with stakeholders and your kind of suppliers to really flesh out the best response. I mean, going forward in terms of procurement reform, so the procurement regulations are going to be reformed by 2023. They're moving away from meat to MAT, which will take a lot of the focus off the kind of economic kind of side of it. So it'll be pushing more on your kind of so it'll be most advantageous tender. So it won't be looking at your costs and everything. So it'll be looking at your whole life costs and everything like that. So that in itself should start to bring a lot more innovative procurement and encourage and embrace more kind of a better approach to delivering things. So whilst I probably didn't answer the question.
No, thanks, Rob. No, that input is really of use and of importance, really, just to our debate here. There's quite a lot going on in the chat, but one person that I'd quite like to draw in, if available, is Peter Austin from a City Deal again perspective. Peter, are you on the call? I did see you earlier.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Peter. Yeah, do you want to come in on the debate here and the issues that we're raising?
It's a bit of a difficult one for me because we have multiple procurements as part of the city deal, and one of our big risks as a portfolio management office is the rising of costs. So that was more our sort of perspective from the discussion today. But certainly the decarbonisation side of it, I think, is something that's going to be more and more prevalent as we go forward. You know, I was very interested to hear Alex's presentation. I thought that was very good, very measured and well presented. So thank you for that, Alex. And it's interesting. You know, we've got a number of projects that are construction focused, for instance, homes as power stations across the whole of the South West Wales. And, you know, it's one of our biggest initiatives in the renewables area. And everything you've talked about today is of concern to us, really, because you know, it's a pump prime portfolio by Welsh and UK government. We've got timeframes, we've got targets to meet, and obviously we've got outcomes. And one of the biggest things we want to do is increase GVA, and really to make that really successful, we need to have a happy house across the whole universe of construction, supply chain, manufacture, technology, R&D, future technology, and everything like that. So it's very valid to listen to what's being said today. It's reassuring to hear Richard's summary of where industry sees itself currently and forward, because our initial concerns as a portfolio were on the rise of costs and the availability of materials. We were looking at potentially £250 million of contracts over the next 2 years through the city deal, part funded by us and our stakeholders. And obviously, if somebody bandies around a 20 to 30% increase in costs across that, it's a bit worrying, because where's the shortfall going to come from? So it's good to hear that things might be calming down, because that's what our clients, client stakeholders are starting to tell us. But it's you know, it's one thing being told it by sort of our client stakeholders. It's also good to hear industry giving a more reality check on that. So, but yeah, I mean, I think I've just found it very interesting. I can't really add much more, but say thank you to our presenters. It's been very useful.
No, thanks, Peter. We've got quite a lot of questions. I'm picking up on innovation of materials. We're looking at homegrown timber here. We're looking at the reality of engagement about the PPNs and getting that through to clients as well. I wonder if there's a solution that we can look at after this seminar as well, about some proposals about how we can actually try and achieve that in a collaborative environment. I'm quite conscious that we're running out of time, so what I would propose is that we capture the questions in the chat box and perhaps circulate that to some of, or to circulate that to our presenters, and get kind of some insight and information around those questions that we can distribute and circulate to attendees as well. And that Constructing Excellence Wales, with a couple of other key stakeholders, might look at coming up with some suggestions about how to look at enhancing engagement, especially client engagement, WPPNs, and supporting the sector in our ongoing materials and product supply issues that we've got. So it seems like quite a dramatic close that I'm giving, but time has ticked on quite considerably. So it is best really to close the meeting. They are the suggestions that I would take this forward. I think it's quite an ongoing debate and something that isn't going to go away. The sector is considering it continually, they are the challenges going forward. So I think it is an ongoing debate about how we feel as a sector and how to move forward, and hopefully work with Welsh Government in that collaborative format in order to work best together from the onset and also throughout. So if I can leave things there, I would just really like to thank our presenters. Like I said, I feel like we've only just scratched the surface, and it's an ongoing conversation really that we should be having collectively. So you know, I found that hugely insightful, and I hope everybody else has. Like I said, your comments on the side won't go away. I'll capture that and take that. So for now, thank you to all our presenters today. Again, hugely insightful, and I'll leave you all to a very good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.